forward would be to expand and grow and become global, or there would be a market which would be more indigenous and small and medium scale enterprises?
So I think there are many ways to be globally competitive, and being global, as in selling your products and services outside of India, is one of those ways.
Okay.
But it's not necessary that an entrepreneur should be either sourcing capital or talent from overseas or selling their services overseas for them to be, in my book anyway, considered a globally competitive company. So when I use the term globally competitive, what I really mean is that they're the best in class, and they can compete with anybody, even on their home turf. Right, so a good example of this would be a very celebrated entrepreneur in this country, Bharti, which really doesn't sell phone services overseas, even though Sudhir Mittal is running around trying to buy African companies and so on. That's really just the latest chapter in a long-running saga, but primarily it's an enterprise that's been built in India, even though it's been built with backing from Singtel and others from Singapore and Warburg Pincus and venture capital and so on. But it's basically an enterprise in India. But it's emphatically a globally competitive company because I think its cost structure is one of the best in the world, etc. So coming back to the SMEs, I think that each SME would create its own destiny in some sense. For some of them, it would make a lot of sense to remain very squarely focused on I don't know, rural Telangana or the backwaters of West Bengal, and for others it would make ample sense to sell to the Mittelstand in Germany or source capital on a small stock exchange in Singapore. So I think it's different strokes for different folks in some sense.
Sure. And in terms of this global movement of capital that you were talking about, and the global movement of talent, we are seeing foreign reserves, we're seeing a lot of investment coming into India. But what about talent? Do you see a lot of cross pollination of talent?
So to use a personal way to describe that, when I started teaching at Harvard Business School in 1993, and started studying India a couple of years later, it was a joke in the faculty, I think. People thought it was crazy, and honestly, as a career move, I think probably the prevailing view was it was dumb. And I did it because I enjoyed it, and I thought that it's what I would most want to get up in the morning and think about the process of development, not just in India, but for me, India was a laboratory. And at that time, it would be very hard to find people from my classroom, from the Harvard Business School classroom, willing to do anything in India. But if you fast forward, say, 4 years from then, the late 90s, you already had the first Indian origin people beginning to set up enterprises in Bangalore in particular. And now it's not unusual to find somebody from Wichita, Kansas saying, oh, it'd be a good experience to go on a program to India, or even to have an internship at one of the major companies in India. So I think we've, again, come a long way in embracing global talent. And equivalently, I should say that that's sort of the supply side, in the sense that these are young people willing to take a chance and see it as career enhancing to do it. But also on the demand side, the companies here are willing to create some companies are willing to create the space to accommodate people who come from a different background. And that itself is a skill that many other countries are also trying to do. You go to China, you go to Korea, Japan, some more successfully than others. And I think having this cross-fertilization, but not just of the Indian diaspora coming back and going back out again, but also tapping into talent pools from anywhere who want to participate in the India story as it's being written, is a wonderful, wonderful thing that we should do our utmost to celebrate.
We'll be back in a few moments, so don't go away. Welcome back to In Transit, and a discussion on the emerging markets in India and China between Professor Tarun Khanna and Amrita Chaudhary of the Harvard Business School.
We'll shift gears for a few minutes and tell me a little bit about your family.
My wife, Ruhi, is a dentist and works part-time in Newton, which is the suburb of Boston where we live. And I have two beautiful kids, Simran, who's 9, and Rishi, who's 7, and they go to the local school in Newton. And they're very global. We're all very global because we travel enormously. We just came back from the Malaysian rainforest last week, where we were flooded out, but we did see a lot of snakes eating a lot of geckos.
So that must have thrilled the kids.
That thrilled the boy, not the girl, too much. And then we get around a lot, and we try to I'm basically trying to expose them to different interesting things around the world as much as possible.
Sure. Like, we see a lot of talk about the third generation children now, especially since we've got Obama as the president in America and his background. Right. So your kids are probably truly global in that sense, seeing a lot of different geographies, experiencing India on their visits. And
yes, very much. Yeah. Again, I guess it depends on how much people enjoy it, and in our case, we really enjoy it. I particularly really enjoy it, so it's not a tax to take the family around and learn from a lot of different circumstances. And I feel that so much more of the education actually happens on the street than it does in the classroom environment.
Yes, for sure.
And that's what we're trying to expose our kids to. So my professional life is exceedingly busy, but also I like to say, and I think it's correct, subordinate to my family life. My wife may characterize it a little bit differently, but very much anchored in Boston with frequent meanderings to Asia, which I accomplish in 1 week round trips every 8 weeks or so to this part of the world. So.
And you've been away from India for many years now, and you still remain connected to India. You've got family here.
My parents live in Delhi, and my wife's parents live in Bombay. An extended family is here. And there are certainly times when we feel not sufficiently connected, but I think for the most part, with modern travel and conveniences and communication and email and BlackBerries and so on, it's become so much easier. I remember when I went as a student in 1984, we had to book a telephone call, right, a month ahead of time, and of course I had no money, so certainly no foreign exchange, legal foreign exchange, and therefore booking a call was a 30-day effort. And now when you think about it, it's such a completely different time. It's hard to even imagine what things would be like in the next even 5 years. So I prefer to think of it as a glass very much half full as opposed to half empty, and very optimistic about.
And we see a lot of people in the diaspora connecting back to India at the moment, right?
Yeah, so this is one place, coming back to the China theme. I think China has done a spectacular job of leveraging its diaspora, and India has done a pathetic job, to put it bluntly. Now, I think this is one area where, again, we're making great strides. And the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, for instance, is a substantive but more importantly symbolic act that the government embarked on some years ago. And I participated, I think, in the first or the second one of those, and really enjoyed it. But and now there's a minister who's in charge of diaspora affairs and non-resident Indian affairs. I may have the name wrong. And a lot of other outreach, CII, FICCI, etc., are all organizing outreach. So that's terrific. But I think relative to what the Chinese have pulled off, we're maybe 1% of what they're able to do right now. And this is something that's basically an untapped resource that I think is available. Because do you know that the most successful ethnic group in America are Indian Americans? This is information from the U.S. Census, the latest U.S. Census. When you look at per capita income levels, I think the per capita income level of Indian Americans, self-declared Indian Americans, is something like $65,000, compared to the next group, which I think is in the $50,000 range. That's an enormous difference. And it's not just America, it's the Gulf, it's Malaysia, it's Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Far East. There are pockets of diaspora Indians, just like there are pockets of diaspora Chinese, who are able to contribute and willing to contribute, do not see it as a tax. And it seems odd that we have this sort of Kalapani approach to things, which is that they cross the waters and so they're gone and not part of our family. That's very short-sighted on multiple levels. And I, in my own tiny way, I try to say this whenever I have an opportunity, and try to participate in the outreach process from both sides. So I hope that continues to improve over time.
But there has been a start, so that's a good.
Yes, very much.
That's a good thing.
Very much. Yes. So in the spirit of seeing things as half full, yes, let's just say there's been an encouraging start.
So in